My name is Ela. I'm 35, and until 3 years ago, I thought I was the weakest person I knew. I'm a single mom to twin daughters Emma and Sophie, who are 8 years old now. We live in a small apartment in Phoenix, Arizona, and if you saw me today, you might think I have it all together. But I want to tell you about the man who tried so hard to convince me I was nothing that he accidentally showed me I was everything. This is the story of how my ex-husband's final attempt to break me became the moment I discovered just how unbreakable I really am. Before I tell you how the man who tried to destroy me accidentally gave me the greatest gift of my life, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about finding strength in unexpected places. Now let me take you back to the day my world crumbled and how that became the foundation for everything beautiful that followed. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs were there from the beginning, but when you're 28 and think you've found your prince, red flags just look like love notes written in a different color. Nathan was everything I thought I wanted. He was a successful corporate lawyer with a corner office downtown, drove a BMW, and had this way of making me feel like I was the most important person in the world. At least that's how it started. We met at a coffee shop near the elementary school, where I taught third grade. I was grading papers when he approached my table, all confidence and charm. He said he'd been watching me work and was impressed by my dedication. Looking back, I realized that was my first clue. He'd been watching me, but at the time it felt romantic. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Expensive dinners, weekend getaways, and constant attention that felt like the fairy tale I'd been waiting for my whole life. When I got pregnant with the twins just 8 months after we started dating, Nathan proposed immediately. He said he wanted to take care of us, that I'd never have to worry about anything again. That should have been my second clue. The changes started small. Nathan suggested I take a leave of absence when I was 6 months pregnant with Emma and Sophie. "You're carrying twins," he'd say, stroking my growing belly. "You need to rest. Besides, my salary is more than enough to support our family." When I hesitated mentioning how much I loved teaching, he'd kiss my forehead and say, "You can always go back after the babies are older. Right now, this is what's best for our children." After the twins were born, going back to work became even more complicated. Nathan had opinions about daycare. "Why would we pay strangers to raise our daughters when their mother could be home with them?" he'd ask. When I mentioned missing the classroom, he'd remind me about the cost of childcare, eating up most of my potential salary anyway. Besides, he'd add, "You're not really good with managing money, Isla. Let me handle the financial decisions while you focus on what you do best, being a mother." That phrase, "you're not really good with money," became his favorite weapon. Every time I wanted something, whether it was groceries for a recipe I'd seen online or a small gift for a friend's birthday, I had to ask Nathan for cash. He'd sigh and pull out his wallet, counting out bills, while explaining why the purchase was unnecessary or how I could have planned better. Slowly, I stopped asking for things. I stopped seeing friends because lunch out required his approval and money. I stopped buying books because that was wasteful spending. I even stopped calling my sister Claire in Oregon, as much because Nathan would hover nearby during our conversations, making comments about long-distance charges. When the twins were 2, Nathan got a promotion that required us to move from Portland, where I'd grown up, to Phoenix, where his new position was based. "It's a fresh start for our family," he announced one evening, not asked. When I brought up leaving my family and the few friends I had left, he reminded me that his career was supporting our entire family now. "Sometimes we have to make sacrifices, Isla. This is what's best for the girls' future." In Phoenix, I knew absolutely no one except Nathan and the twins. He'd come home from work each evening and ask about my day, but his questions felt more like inventory checks than genuine interest. "What did you do with the girls? How much did you spend at the grocery store? Did anyone call the house?" If I'd spent more than he expected or talked to a neighbor, I'd get a lecture about budgeting or oversharing our personal business. The worst part was how he'd frame everything as protection. "I'm just looking out for you, honey," he'd say after questioning a purchase or criticizing a decision I'd made. "You're so trusting, so naive sometimes. The world is full of people who would take advantage of someone like you. I'm the only one who truly has your best interests at heart." By the time Emma and Sophie started kindergarten, I genuinely believed I was incapable of making good decisions without Nathan's guidance. When I suggested maybe getting a part-time job now that the girls were in school, he laughed. Not mean laughter, but the kind of gentle chuckling you might do if a child suggested something adorable but impossible. "Isla, sweetheart, you haven't worked in 5 years. The job market is completely different now. Besides, what would you even do? You'd need new certifications references. It would be more trouble than it's worth. The divorce wasn't my idea. Nathan announced it on a Tuesday evening in March, right after the twins had gone to bed. He sat me down at our kitchen table and explained that he'd fallen in love with his paralegal, Jennifer. He was very matter-of-fact about it, like he was explaining a change in his work schedule, rather than the end of our 7-year marriage. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "These papers outline everything. You'll get alimony for 2 years, which should be plenty of time for you to figure out your next steps. I'll take the girls every other weekend and 1 evening a week. The house will need to be sold, of course, but your share should cover a small apartment somewhere." I stared at the papers, feeling like I was reading them through water. Everything was swimming, and I couldn't make sense of what was happening. "Nathan," I whispered, "I don't understand. What did I do wrong?" His expression softened slightly. "You didn't do anything wrong, Isla. You've become so dependent, so narrow in your thinking. I need a partner who can challenge me, who brings something to the table beyond just taking care of children. Jennifer and I connect on an intellectual level that you and I just never had." 6 months later, I was living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with peeling wallpaper and a refrigerator that made strange humming noises all night long. The twins had bunk beds in the smaller room, and I slept on a mattress on the floor in what the landlord generously called the master bedroom. My share from selling the house had gone mostly to deposits, moving expenses, and the cheapest furniture I could find. But Nathan wasn't done with me yet. The custody arrangement that had seemed reasonable on paper became a nightmare in reality. Nathan would pick up Emma and Sophie every other Friday evening and return them Sunday night with stories about their weekend. Daddy took us to the fancy mall. Sophie would tell me, eyes bright with excitement. He bought us new dresses and said we looked like princesses. Then Emma would add, "Daddy said you probably can't afford to take us to places like that because money is tight for you right now." When I confronted Nathan about these comments, he'd act surprised. "I never said anything like that, Isla. You're being paranoid. Children misunderstand things sometimes." But the comments continued, and they got worse. Daddy said if we lived with him full-time, we could have the pool we've always wanted. Daddy's apartment has cable TV and a big kitchen where we can bake cookies whenever we want. The legal intimidation started around the same time. Nathan's lawyer would send letters to my apartment, thick envelopes with law firm letterheads that made my stomach clench every time I saw them in my mailbox. They'd cite concerns about the children's living environment and suggest that modification of custody arrangements might be necessary if standards of care continue to decline. I couldn't afford a lawyer to respond to these letters. Nathan knew this. He'd engineered my financial dependence so thoroughly that even with the modest alimony, I was barely scraping by. The child support payments were always late, usually accompanied by texts about cash flow issues at the firm or unexpected expenses that had delayed his ability to send money. When I finally got desperate enough to look for work, Nathan somehow found ways to sabotage those efforts too. I'd interview for administrative positions, feeling hopeful about finally regaining some independence, only to get calls a few days later saying the position had been filled. It happened 3 times before a sympathetic hiring manager told me that someone had called their office, claiming to be a former supervisor of mine, expressing serious concerns about my reliability and emotional stability. The apartment hunting was even worse. I'd find places within my budget, fill out applications, provide references, and wait hopefully for approval. Then landlords would call to say they'd received information that made them uncomfortable about renting to me. One property manager was kind enough to tell me privately that someone had called claiming to be my ex-husband, saying I had ongoing mental health issues that made me an unreliable tenant. I was trapped. Nathan had systematically destroyed every path to independence I tried to build, all while maintaining the perfect facade of a concerned ex-husband who was worried about the children's stability. To the outside world, he looked like the reasonable parent dealing with an unstable ex-wife who couldn't keep a job or maintain decent housing. The worst part was how it affected Emma and Sophie. They'd come home from their weekends with Nathan full of excitement about his new life, but confused about why our life seemed so much harder. "Mommy," Emma asked me one evening as I was serving them mac and cheese from a box for the 3rd time that week, "why doesn't Daddy give us more money if he has so much?" I didn't know how to answer that question without poisoning them against their father, so I'd smile and say something about how money isn't the most important thing, all while feeling like a fraud, because money was exactly what stood between us and stability. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in November, almost exactly 1 year after Nathan had served me with divorce papers. I woke up that morning with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I'd spent weeks preparing, gathering every piece of documentation I could find that showed I was a good mother despite our financial struggles. Report cards from the twins' teachers, photos of birthday parties I'd thrown in our tiny apartment, even a letter from our pediatrician confirming that Emma and Sophie were healthy and well cared for. Nathan arrived at the courthouse with his lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in an expensive suit, who looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found on her shoe. I represented myself because I simply couldn't afford legal representation, armed with a folder of documents and a hope that the truth would be enough. But Nathan had come prepared for war. His lawyer presented a case that painted me as an unstable mother living in substandard conditions, who couldn't provide for her children's basic needs. They had photos of our apartment building, which admittedly looked rough from the outside. They had documentation of the times I'd been late picking up the girls from school because my car had broken down. They even had testimony from a neighbor I barely knew, claiming she'd heard concerning sounds from our apartment late at night. The sounds, I realized with horror, were me crying in the bathroom after the twins had gone to sleep. But the worst part was when Nathan took the stand. He spoke about his concerns for Emma and Sophie's well-being with such apparent sincerity that I almost believed him myself. He talked about finding them in clothes that didn't fit properly, about how they'd lost weight since the divorce, about my increasingly erratic behavior that worried him as their father. "Your Honor," he said, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine anguish, "I don't want to take the children away from their mother, but I've watched Isla struggle with the transition to independence, and I'm concerned that her current living situation and mental state aren't providing the stability Emma and Sophie need during this difficult time." When it was my turn to speak, I stood up on shaking legs and tried to defend myself against accusations that felt like funhouse mirror versions of reality. Yes, our apartment was small, but it was clean and safe. Yes, I'd been late for pickup a few times, but never because I was neglectful. Only because I was working multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet. Yes, I sometimes cried at night, but that was because I was doing everything I could to hold our lives together under impossible circumstances. The judge, a tired-looking man in his 60s, listened to both sides with an expression that gave nothing away. When he announced his decision, I felt the world tilt sideways. Temporary modification of custody. Nathan would have the girls Sunday through Wednesday each week, and I would have them Thursday through Saturday. Until Ms. Thompson can demonstrate improved stability in housing and employment, the judge said, his voice echoing in my head like a death sentence. The drive home in my 15-year-old Honda with Emma and Sophie in the back seat was the longest 20 minutes of my life. They kept asking why I was crying, and I kept lying and saying I had allergies. When we pulled into the parking lot of our apartment complex, Sophie pointed to the bright yellow paper taped to our front door. "Mommy, what's that?" It was an eviction notice, 30 days to vacate for non-payment of rent. The child support check that was supposed to cover rent had been late again, and I'd fallen behind by 2 months. That evening, after I'd tucked the girls into their bunk beds and kissed them goodnight, Nathan called. His voice was gentle, almost kind, the way it used to be when we were first married. "Isla, I heard about the eviction notice. I'm sorry things have gotten so difficult for you." I was too exhausted to ask how he'd heard about it so quickly. "I've been thinking," he continued, "and I have a solution that might help everyone. Jennifer and I are buying a house with a pool house in the backyard. It's small but nice, completely separate from the main house. You could live there rent-free, and the girls could have access to both of their parents whenever they needed us." There was a pause, and then he delivered the condition that would haunt me for months afterward. "Of course you'd need to sign over primary custody to me since I'd be providing your housing. Just a formality, really, but my lawyer says it's necessary for insurance purposes. The girls would still see you every day. You'd just be more like a live-in nanny than their custodial parent." I hung up the phone without answering, but the seed was planted. As I sat in our tiny bathroom that night, looking at job applications for minimum wage positions that would barely cover childcare costs, Nathan's offer echoed in my head. I could keep my daughters close. I could stop fighting a battle I seemed destined to lose. All I had to do was admit that he was right about me all along. I was nothing. The community center was my last resort before accepting Nathan's offer. I'd heard they had resources for single mothers, maybe even emergency housing assistance. I walked through the doors that Tuesday morning, feeling like I was admitting defeat, but desperate enough to try anything. The woman at the information desk directed me to a small office where I could meet with someone about family services. I sat in the waiting area watching other people come and go, wondering if they could see the desperation radiating off me like heat from pavement. Isla Thompson. I looked up to see a woman about my age with kind eyes and graying hair, pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a comfortable sweater, nothing like the social workers I'd imagined. "I'm Grace Chen," she said, extending her hand. "I volunteer here on Tuesdays. Why don't you come back to my office and we can talk about what's bringing you in today?" Her office was small but warm, with plants on the windowsill and children's drawings taped to one wall. Grace settled behind her desk and looked at me with the kind of patient attention I hadn't experienced in months. "Tell me what's going on," she said simply. The whole story came pouring out. The divorce, the custody battle, the eviction, Nathan's offer that felt like salvation and surrender, all wrapped up together. Grace listened without interrupting occasionally, nodding or making soft sounds of understanding. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked a question that changed everything. "Isla, why do you think your ex-husband is working so hard to prove you're incapable?" I blinked at her, confused. Because I am incapable. I mean, look at my life. I can't keep a job, can't afford decent housing for my kids, can't even afford a lawyer to defend myself in court." Grace leaned forward slightly. "Or maybe he's working so hard to convince you that you're incapable because he's terrified of what might happen if you realize you're not." The words hit me like cold water. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Grace said gently, "that your ex-husband isn't trying to break you by accident. He's afraid of what you might become if you ever discovered your own strength. Think about it. Why would someone go to such elaborate lengths to sabotage a person who is already broken? You don't need to destroy something that's already destroyed." She pulled a business card from her desk drawer. "I don't just volunteer here, Ela. I run a consulting firm downtown. We help small businesses with organizational systems and client relations. I could use someone with your background in education, someone who understands how to communicate with people and manage complex situations." I stared at the card. "Grace, I haven't worked in 6 years. I don't know anything about business consulting. You've been managing a household, raising twins, and navigating a hostile legal system while maintaining your sanity and your children's well-being," she said. "If you can do all that, you can learn to help business owners organize their operations. The question is whether you're ready to bet on yourself the way I'm willing to bet on you." The job was part-time to start, just 20 hours a week, but it was enough to give me hope. Grace insisted I take time to think about it, but I knew my answer before I left her office. "There's one thing you should know," I told her as I stood to leave. "My ex-husband will probably call you. He's made it his mission to sabotage any job opportunity I get." Grace smiled. "Then I'll know I made the right choice." My first day at Grace Chen Consulting was the following Monday. I wore a dress I'd bought at a thrift store and shoes that pinched my feet, but I felt more professional than I had in years. Grace introduced me to the small team, 3 other consultants, who welcomed me with a warmth I hadn't expected. The work was different from teaching, but used many of the same skills. I helped clients organize their filing systems, streamline their communication processes, and develop better relationships with their customers. Grace was right about my background being valuable. Years of managing parent-teacher conferences and classroom logistics translated surprisingly well to business consulting. By the end of my first week, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed: pride in my work. And then Nathan called Grace. I was at my desk on Friday afternoon when Grace walked over, her expression unreadable. "Isla, could I see you in my office for a moment?" My stomach dropped. This was it. Whatever Nathan had told her was enough to end my brief return to employment. Grace closed the door behind us and sat down across from me. "I got an interesting phone call this morning," she said. "A man claiming to be your ex-husband wanted to warn me about your emotional instability and unreliable work habits." I felt tears starting to form. "Grace, I can explain." She held up her hand to stop me. "Isla, that phone call told me everything I need to know about you." I braced myself for the inevitable. "It told me that you're exactly the kind of person I want working here," she continued. "Someone who threatens people like him enough that he'll go to elaborate lengths to try to sabotage your success. In my experience, when a man works that hard, to convince the world that a woman is worthless, it's because he's terrified of her worth. Working at Grace's firm was like remembering how to breathe. Each day, I felt a little more like myself, or maybe I was becoming someone entirely new, someone capable and confident and valued. The confidence wasn't immediate. For the first month, I second-guessed every decision and apologized for asking questions. But Grace and the team were patient with me, and gradually I started to trust my own judgment again. I was good at the work, really good. Clients responded to my listening skills and my ability to break down complex problems into manageable steps. Grace promoted me to junior consultant after just 2 months, which came with a small raise that made an enormous difference in my ability to keep up with rent and basic expenses. For the first time since the divorce, I wasn't living in constant fear of financial catastrophe. The twins noticed the change too. Emma started drawing pictures of mommy at her office, and Sophie would ask about my day with genuine curiosity. They seemed proud that I had important work to do, and I realized how much my own shame about our situation had been affecting them. But Nathan noticed the change as well, and he didn't like it. The legal threats escalated first. His lawyer sent more letters now questioning whether my unstable work situation was appropriate for someone with primary custody responsibilities. When that didn't work, Nathan started showing up places where he knew I'd be. He'd appear at the twins' school events making pointed comments about how difficult this transition has been for Ela within earshot of other parents. He'd find excuses to come by my workplace, bringing some forgotten item for the girls that he claimed they'd left at his apartment. The social media stalking was probably the most unnerving. Nathan created fake profiles to follow me online, commenting on posts and photos with messages that seemed supportive on the surface, but carried subtle threats underneath. Glad to see you're keeping busy with work, Isla. Hope you're not spreading yourself too thin with everything else you have to manage. Grace taught me to document everything: screenshots, written records of phone calls, copies of emails, and text messages. Men like Nathan count on their victims not keeping track, she told me. They rely on gaslighting and making you question your own memory, but documentation doesn't lie. It was through this documentation that I discovered something interesting about Nathan's increasingly erratic behavior. The pattern of his contact attempts didn't match someone who was genuinely concerned about co-parenting. They matched someone who was spiraling. Grace helped me do some research that revealed the truth: Nathan's firm had let him go 3 months earlier. The gambling debts I'd never known about had caught up with him, and his professional reputation was in ruins. His fancy apartment was actually a sublet he could barely afford, and his threats to take full custody were empty. He couldn't afford the legal battle any more than I could. This revelation changed everything. Nathan's power over me had always been financial, but that power was an illusion now. He was just as broke as I was, but unlike me, he hadn't figured out how to rebuild. I made a decision that would have terrified me 6 months earlier. I stopped responding to his manipulation attempts. When he called with urgent concerns about the girls, I listened politely and then said, "I'll take that under consideration, Nathan. Is there anything else?" When he sent threatening emails, I forwarded them to Grace and my documentation file, but didn't respond. When he showed up at my workplace uninvited, I had security escort him out. The boundary setting felt revolutionary. "You're not required to be his victim anymore, Isla," Grace reminded me during one of our weekly check-ins. "You have value that exists completely independent of his opinion of you. The question now is whether you're ready to start acting like you believe that." The turning point came on a Tuesday evening in March, almost exactly 1 year after Nathan had announced our divorce. Emma and Sophie were performing in their school's spring concert, and I'd been looking forward to watching them sing for weeks. Nathan was already in the auditorium when I arrived, sitting with Jennifer in the front row. He waved at me with exaggerated friendliness, patting the empty seat beside him, as if we were one big happy family. I chose to sit several rows back instead. The concert was beautiful. Emma and Sophie sang their hearts out, and I felt that familiar surge of fierce mother love watching them on stage. They were thriving despite everything we'd been through, and I was finally in a position to give them the stability they deserved. After the performance, parents gathered in the hallway to take pictures and congratulate the children. I was hugging the twins and telling them how proud I was when Nathan approached with his phone out. "Isla," he said loudly, "you look so thin. Are you eating enough? I worry about you working so much and trying to handle everything on your own." Other parents turned to look, and I recognized the familiar setup. This was Nathan's specialty public concern that was actually private humiliation, but something was different this time. I looked at him, really looked at him and saw what I'd been too afraid to see before. He was desperate. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his eyes were bloodshot. The confident, controlling man I'd been terrified of for months was actually a person barely holding his own life together. "I'm doing very well, Nathan," I said calmly. "Thank you for asking." He wasn't expecting that response. He'd expected defensiveness or embarrassment, some reaction he could use to escalate the situation. "Well," he continued, his voice getting louder, "I just think it's important that we present a united front for the girls. Maybe we could have coffee sometime and discuss how to better coordinate their care. If you have concerns about the girls' well-being, you're welcome to communicate them through our established channels," I replied, still calm. "Right now, I'm here to celebrate Emma and Sophie's performance." Nathan's facade cracked slightly. "Don't be difficult, Isla. I'm trying to be nice here." That's when Mrs. Patterson, the twins' teacher, stepped closer to our conversation. She'd clearly been listening, and her expression was concerned. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, looking directly at Nathan. "Everything's fine," Nathan said quickly, but his voice had an edge now. "I was just trying to talk to my ex-wife about our children, but she's being unreasonable as usual." Mrs. Patterson frowned. "Actually, Mr. Thompson, I need to speak with you about that. We've received some concerning calls to the school office recently." Nathan went very still. "What kind of calls?" "Someone claiming to be you has been calling to question Isla's fitness as a mother and suggesting that the school should document any signs of neglect or instability in Emma and Sophie." I felt the ground shift under my feet. I'd known Nathan was sabotaging my job prospects, but I hadn't realized he was trying to poison my relationship with the twins' school, too. "The thing is," Mrs. Patterson continued, "the person calling didn't seem to have basic information that a father should know about his children. Wrong classroom numbers, incorrect teacher names, confusion about which activities they're involved in. It made us suspicious enough to make some notes." Nathan's face was getting red. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Perhaps not," Mrs. Patterson said diplomatically. "But I want to be clear that Emma and Sophie are two of our happiest, most well-adjusted students. Isla has been nothing but responsive and involved in their education. If someone continues to call our school with false concerns about this family, we'll have no choice but to report it to the appropriate authorities." The hallway had gotten very quiet. Other parents were definitely listening now, but instead of judging me, they seemed to be seeing Nathan clearly for the first time. "You're clearly upset," I said to Nathan, keeping my voice level. "I think it would be best if you took some time to cool down before we continue this conversation." "Don't tell me what I need," Nathan snapped, and there it was. The mask was completely off now, and everyone could see the angry, controlling man underneath the concerned ex-husband act. "Nathan," I said quietly, "you're scaring the children." He looked around and realized that Emma and Sophie were indeed staring at him with wide, frightened eyes. Several other children had moved closer to their own parents, sensing the tension. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Jennifer to hurry after him with an apologetic look. I knelt down to hug my daughters, my hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. "Mommy," Sophie whispered, "why was Daddy so angry?" "Sometimes people get overwhelmed by big feelings," I told her, smoothing her hair. "But that's not your fault, and it's not something you need to worry about." Mrs. Patterson knelt down beside us. "Emma, Sophie, you both were absolutely wonderful tonight. Your mom must be so proud of you." "She is," Emma said firmly. "Mommy is proud of us every day."
Bye.
As we walked to the car that night, I realized something profound had just happened. For the first time in our relationship, I had refused to be Nathan's victim in public. I had remained calm while he fell apart. I had been the adult in the situation while he acted like a child. And everyone had seen it. Nathan's restraining order violation happened 3 weeks later on a Thursday night when the twins were at his apartment for their scheduled visit. I was home alone working on a project for Grace's firm when I heard the loud knocking on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Nathan swaying slightly on my doorstep. His hair was messy and his shirt was untucked, and even through the door I could smell the alcohol. "Isla," he called, his words slurred. "Open the door, we need to talk." My heart started racing, but this time it wasn't with the familiar fear. It was with clarity. Nathan was drunk at my apartment when he was supposed to be caring for our children. "Nathan, go home," I called through the door. "If you need to discuss something about Emma and Sophie, you can call me tomorrow." "No," he said, banging harder on the door. "We're going to settle this tonight. You think you're so much better than me now, with your little job and your attitude, but you're nothing, Isla. You're nothing without me. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I made you, he continued, his voice getting louder. Everything you are is because of what I gave you. Those kids, this apartment, even that pathetic job you're so proud of. I could take it all away tomorrow if I wanted to. Nathan, I said, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. You're intoxicated and you're violating the custody agreement. Where are Emma and Sophie? There was a pause. They're fine. They're at Jennifer's apartment, but that's not the point. That is exactly the point, I said. You're supposed to be caring for them, and instead you're drunk at my door making threats. The banging got more aggressive. Open this door, Ela. Don't make me do something we'll both regret. That was when I called 911. The police arrived within 10 minutes, finding Nathan still on my doorstep, now sitting on the ground with his head in his hands. I gave them my recording and explained the situation, while they administered a breathalyzer test that confirmed what was already obvious. The officer who took my statement was a woman about my age with kind but serious eyes. Ma'am, this behavior constitutes harassment and violates several aspects of your custody agreement, she told me. We're going to arrest him tonight, and I'd strongly recommend that you file for a restraining order first thing tomorrow morning. What about my daughters? I asked. They're supposed to be with him until Sunday. We'll do a welfare check at the address he gave us, she assured me. If the children are safe with this Jennifer person, they can stay there tonight, and you can pick them up in the morning, but Mr. Thompson won't be allowed unsupervised visits until this gets sorted out in court. Watching Nathan get handcuffed in my apartment complex parking lot should have felt like victory, but mostly it felt sad. This was the man I'd once loved, the father of my children, reduced to drunk and desperate threats because he couldn't accept that his power over me was gone. I called Grace the next morning and told her what had happened. She recommended a lawyer who specialized in family law and domestic harassment cases, someone who would work with me on a payment plan. Isla, Grace said before we hung up, I know this is scary, but you've just taken the most important step you could take. You've stopped allowing his behavior to be your problem and started making it his problem instead. The court hearing was scheduled for the following week. This time, I had legal representation documentation of Nathan's harassment police reports and witness statements from Mrs. Patterson and others who had seen his increasingly erratic behavior. Nathan showed up to court looking like a different person. Gone was the polished lawyer in expensive suits. This man looked tired, defeated, and genuinely remorseful. When the judge asked him to explain his recent actions, Nathan actually broke down crying. Your Honor, he said. I've been dealing with some personal issues, financial stress, and I know I've handled this situation poorly. I never meant to frighten Isla or put our children at risk. I felt like I was losing everything, and I handled it in completely the wrong way. For a moment, I felt sorry for him, but then I remembered all the times he'd used tears and vulnerability to manipulate me, and I stayed focused on what mattered, protecting Emma and Sophie. The judge's ruling was clear. Full custody to me, with Nathan allowed supervised visitation only until he completed anger management and substance abuse counseling. A restraining order preventing him from coming to my home or workplace. An immediate garnishment of his wages for child support, assuming he could find employment again. As we left the courthouse, Nathan approached me in the hallway. He looked genuinely broken. Isla, he said quietly, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm truly sorry for what I put you through. I looked at him for a long moment, this man who had once controlled every aspect of my life, who had tried so hard to convince me I was worthless. I believe you are sorry, Nathan, I said finally, and I hope you get the help you need, for your sake and for Emma and Sophie's sake. Do you think... He started, then stopped. Do you think there's any chance you could forgive me someday? I considered the question seriously. I think forgiveness is something I'll do for myself when I'm ready, but that doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it was okay. He nodded, looking like he understood. As I watched him walk away, I realized that the fear was gone. Nathan no longer had any power over my life or my daughter's lives. More than that, I no longer needed his validation or approval. I had discovered something he'd tried to destroy, but had accidentally strengthened instead my own sense of worth. 1 year later, I'm writing this story from the living room of our new house. It's not a mansion, but it's ours. 3 bedrooms, a small yard where Emma and Sophie can play, and a kitchen table where we eat dinner together every night. Grace promoted me to senior consultant 6 months ago, and I'm now leading my own client projects. The work is challenging and rewarding, and for the first time in my adult life, I feel truly independent. Not just financially, though, that's important too, but emotionally and mentally independent. I make my own decisions, trust my own judgment, and live according to my own values. The twins are thriving. They see Nathan every other Saturday at the supervised visitation center, and those visits have actually gotten better as he's worked on himself in therapy. He's sober now, employed again at a smaller firm, and seems genuinely committed to being a better father. We'll never be friends, but we've found a way to co-parent that doesn't involve manipulation or control. I've started dating again carefully and on my own terms. There's a kind teacher at the girls' school who asked me to coffee last month, and I said yes, because I wanted to, not because I needed someone to take care of me. That feels revolutionary. But the most important change is in how I see myself. Nathan spent years trying to convince me that I was weak, dependent, incapable of surviving on my own. He worked so hard to break me down that he accidentally revealed something neither of us had known was there. I was unbreakable. The woman who signed those divorce papers a year and a half ago genuinely believed she was nothing without a man's protection and guidance. She thought she needed permission to make decisions, approval for her choices, and someone else's money to survive. But that woman was never real. She was a creation of fear and manipulation, a cage built out of someone else's need for control. The real me, the one I'm still getting to know, is capable of amazing things. I can support my children, build a career, make friends, buy a house, and create a life that's entirely my own. I can set boundaries, demand respect, and walk away from situations that don't serve me. Most importantly, I can teach my daughters what I wish someone had taught me, that their worth doesn't depend on anyone else's opinion of them, that they never need to make themselves smaller to make someone else comfortable, and that the right people will love them for their strength, not despite it. Nathan tried to destroy me, but he gave me the greatest gift instead. He showed me that I was strong enough to survive his worst, which means I'm strong enough to handle anything. The person trying to keep you small sees something in you that you might not see yet. They see your potential, your power, your ability to thrive without them. Their fear of your strength is actually evidence of your strength. If you're listening to this and you feel trapped in someone else's definition of who you are, please know this: you are not too weak to leave, too stupid to succeed, or too damaged to heal. You are not responsible for managing someone else's emotions or protecting their ego at the expense of your own well-being. You are enough exactly as you are to build the life you want. I thought Nathan was breaking me, but he was actually breaking the cage I didn't know I was in. And once I was free, I discovered something beautiful. I had wings all along. What's your story of discovering your own strength? Have you ever had someone try to tear you down who accidentally built you up instead? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more real stories about finding your power, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, you're stronger than you know. Until next time, keep flying.